one of the biggest economic decisions of Donald Trump's second term, selecting the next chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve, has suddenly become far more tangled. After months of silence, the president has finally hinted he knows his pick. And for financial markets, that hint was enough to trigger concern, sell-offs, and rising bond yields. Here's why investors are worried, and how one job appointment could reshape America's entire financial system. Last week, Trump publicly suggested that he has a successor in mind for Jerome Powell, whose term as chair ends in May. Shortly after, he went further, pointing to Kevin Hassett, head of the National Economic Council, and calling him a potential Fed chair. The reaction was immediate. The 10-year Treasury yield jumped sharply after reports said Hassett was the leading contender. Major investors expressed fears that Hassett would push for aggressive rate cuts, in line with Trump's long-standing desire for cheaper money. Behind closed doors, major banks and asset managers reportedly told officials they worry a Hassett-led Fed would be too aligned with the White House, potentially weakening the central bank's political independence. And that independence is the foundation of global trust in the American economy. Federal Reserve chairs have enormous influence, but they hold only one vote on a 12-member committee, meaning they cannot single-handedly force policy. Yet investors still care deeply about the chair's mindset. Hassett is a longtime Trump ally, and critics fear he may be more receptive to political pressure for rapid rate cuts. That could make borrowing cheaper in the short run, but risks overheating the economy and fueling inflation. If markets believe the Fed is bending to politics, investors may demand higher returns on U.S. debt. Ironically, that would push long-term interest rates higher anyway, the opposite of what a dovish Fed might try to achieve. As one analyst put it, markets act as a reality check for political decisions. If the pick sparks panic, the White House might be forced into an embarrassing reversal. Choosing the next Fed chair is already complicated by formal rules. Only someone who is already a Fed governor can be appointed chair. And as of today, the board has no vacant seats. That adds several layers of political chess. If Trump elevates Hassett, he must first nominate him as a governor, which means finding a new leader for the National Economic Council. Some advisors have floated the idea of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent doing both jobs at once. Trump himself has hinted he'd gladly make Bessent the Fed chair. But Bessent has shown no interest in leaving Treasury. Then there's Stephen Miran, chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, who is on temporary leave to serve as a Fed governor. He has been voting for much larger rate cuts than the Fed majority, placing him on the dovish side of monetary policy debates. His term ends in January, but Miran has said he will not resign until a replacement is confirmed. That could give Trump an option to elevate him instead of Hassett if Powell chooses to step down in May. In other words, the president is weighing multiple moves across multiple positions, and each affects the others. Adding to the uncertainty is a lawsuit involving Governor Lisa Cook. Trump attempted to fire her earlier this year, marking the first time a sitting Fed governor has ever been targeted for removal. Cook challenged it in court, and the final decision is expected from the Supreme Court next year. If Cook loses the case, her seat becomes vacant, giving Trump a chance to reshape the board's majority at a moment when the Fed's political independence is already under scrutiny. Economists warn that too much political influence could lead to long-term inflation problems if rate cuts are pushed beyond what the economy needs. With the U.S. economy facing crosscurrents, slower growth, elevated debt, and pressure for cheaper credit, the next Fed chair will guide how the world's largest economy navigates 2026 and beyond. Markets want reassurance that the central bank will stay independent. Trump wants a chair who aligns with his economic priorities, and the Fed's internal rules make the process even more complex. The final pick will shape interest rates, bond markets, the dollar, and potentially the global economy. Trump says he already knows who he wants. But between investor backlash, legal fights, and shifting roles inside the administration, the path to the next Fed chair is anything but simple.